It was a quiet afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day when the sun shines with moderate intensity, spreading a golden light that highlights every detail of the city's bustling streets. The gentle breeze brought with it a touch of freshness, balancing the typical California heat. Amidst this landscape, a man with a humble appearance and worn clothes was sitting on a sidewalk, watching passers-by with a look that mixed hope and resignation. He didn't know that this day would change his life forever. Across the street walked none other than Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, known for his imposing presence both on screen and in real life. With firm steps, yet carrying a serenity typical of someone who has lived many stories, he advanced, seemingly immersed in his thoughts. But his attention was suddenly captured by the man on the sidewalk, whose expression seemed to carry more than just the daily struggle to survive. When the homeless man reached out his hand and humbly asked for just $1, he had no idea he was about to cause an unexpected change in the life of one of cinema's greatest icons. Clint Eastwood's response would be something no one could have predicted. Outside a quiet cafe on the busy Melrose Avenue, Clint Eastwood was sitting in the shade of an awning. He wore sunglasses that partially covered his face, giving him an air of mystery. Although the years had softened the rigidity of his striking features, his presence was unmistakable. Clint emanated an aura that made the people around him hesitate between approaching to ask for an autograph or respecting the contemplative solitude of an icon. As he savored his drink, the continuous movement of the avenue seemed to go unnoticed by him. It was as if Clint were in a separate world, oblivious to the noise of cars and the bustle of pedestrians. However, his tranquility was not complete. Across the street, a man watched the scene with tired eyes and an uncertain expression. His clothes, a jumble of worn and stained layers, told stories of sleepless nights and hard days. His name was Kevin, a man who, not long ago, would never have imagined being in the position he found himself in. Kevin held a small cardboard sign, hastily written, while his other arm remained close to his body, his nervous hand fiddling with his pocket. His hair was disheveled, and his unshaven beard accentuated his downtrodden appearance. At that moment, Kevin was not just another face among many. He carried the weight of weeks spent sleeping behind a dumpster at a nearby convenience store. Struggling to stay alive with the little he could gather, hunger had become a constant companion, a pain that gave him no rest. It had been 2 days since his last decent meal, and the need was beginning to erode the little pride he had left. As Kevin looked around the cafe, searching for someone who might seem accessible enough to offer help, his eyes finally landed on Clint Eastwood. He hesitated. What chance would a man like him, invisible to the world, have of being noticed by someone so legendary? The idea seemed absurd, but the emptiness in his stomach spoke louder than his doubt. Taking a deep breath, Kevin crossed the street, the weight of shame increasing with each step. As he approached, his voice came out almost inaudibly, muffled by insecurity. "Sir, can you lend me $1?" he asked, with his head down and his words laden with discomfort. Clint slowly raised his eyes, removing his sunglasses with deliberate calm. His movements were controlled, as if each gesture had a purpose. For a moment, his expression was indecipherable. Kevin stood still, feeling a chill down his spine, as if he were being evaluated. He began to think he might have made a mistake, but before he could say anything, Clint leaned back in the chair, studying him with an intensity that seemed to unravel layers of his soul. $1, huh?" Clint murmured, his tone neutral, almost intrigued. Then, with a slight smile on his face, he continued, "Sit down. Let's talk." Kevin blinked, stunned by the response. Those words seemed surreal, as if they were part of a movie he used to watch before his life fell apart. He examined Clint's face, looking for any sign of malice or sarcasm, but found nothing but genuine curiosity. With a hesitant nod, Kevin accepted the invitation. He pulled up a chair and sat down, still wondering if all of this was real. His movements were cautious, as if any misstep could break the strange connection beginning to form between them. He placed the cardboard sign on the table, turning it so as to draw as little attention as possible. Clint's presence was intimidating, yet strangely comforting. Kevin could feel the actor's gaze on him, a look that did not judge but seemed to seek understanding of the story behind the worn clothes and downtrodden expression. Kevin was not accustomed to this kind of attention. Most people ignored him or tossed a few coins without even looking into his eyes. But there, in front of Clint Eastwood, he felt something different. It was as if, for the first time in years, someone was willing to listen to him. And before he could control himself, the words began to flow. "I'm sorry if I'm bothering you, sir," Kevin said, his voice trembling. "I usually don't do this. I don't like to ask. I'm just trying to get by. I'm looking for work, but things are harder than I imagined." He looked at his own hands, ashamed of his own vulnerability. But Clint said nothing. He simply listened, giving Kevin the space that no one else seemed willing to offer. Feeling encouraged, Kevin took a deep breath and continued. "I used to be a contractor," he explained, his voice choking. "I had a team, steady work. But then the recession hit and everything changed. Jobs disappeared, savings ran out, and the eviction notices started coming. It wasn't long before I lost everything." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "I spent my life building houses for other people, but now I can't even keep a roof over my own head. Ironic, don't you think?" He tried to laugh, but the sound came out bitter and hollow. Clint remained silent, but Kevin noticed that something in his expression had changed. His eyes, once inquisitive, now seemed softer, almost compassionate. Kevin, overwhelmed by a mix of shame and need, tried to change the direction of the conversation. "I know you must hear stories like mine all the time. I don't want to be just another one. I'm just trying to find a way out." Clint leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and intertwining his hands. The air around them seemed to grow denser, more charged, as if the moment had stopped in time. Kevin felt his heart race. He expected Clint to pull out a few dollars from his wallet and go on his way. But instead, the actor asked a simple question that caught him completely off guard. "What's your name?" Clint reached into his pocket, the movement slow and deliberate, as if carefully considering what to do next. Kevin held his breath, already anticipating the moment the dollar would appear and the interaction would end with a polite but disinterested farewell. After all, that was what he expected from the people he met, even the most generous. However, Clint surprised him again. Instead of taking money, he pulled out a business card, simple and discreet, and slid it across the table toward Kevin. "Come here," Clint said in a firm tone, but far from rude. "This place is a shelter run by a friend of mine. They can help you get clean, find a job, and maybe find a place to stay. But in the end, it's up to you to take the first step." Kevin stared at the card, his hands trembling slightly as he took it. The simple print with the name and address seemed to carry a disproportionate weight. To him, it was not just a piece of paper. It was a lifeline pulling him to the surface, but also a reminder of the countless times his hope had been crushed. "Why?" Kevin asked, his voice choking and hoarse. "Why are you doing this? You have no reason to care." Clint leaned slightly, and his expression, though firm, softened. "Because, Kevin, someone did that for me once. And if that person hadn't believed in me, I wouldn't be here today." Kevin tried to process those words, but they didn't seem to fit his reality. He looked at the card again, feeling a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and a fear that made him hesitate. "I've tried places like that before," he said finally with a sigh. "They don't help people like me." Clint did not look away, but his expression became more intense, as if he were digging into the meaning behind Kevin's words. "People like you?" Clint asked, his voice firm and inquisitive. "What does that mean, Kevin?" Kevin swallowed hard, looking away. He didn't know exactly how to respond, but the words came out before he could filter them. It means guys like me. We've been forgotten. We're invisible. For a moment, silence hung between them. But then Clint leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the table. His voice, low but filled with conviction, cut through the air like a sharp blade. You think I've never been down? That I never knew what it's like to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, thinking no one cares? Clint asked, the words reverberating in the space between them. Kevin looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. He didn't expect Clint to share something so personal, but the actor's face, though calm, carried a gravity that only someone who had lived through it could display. I grew up very poor, Kevin, Clint continued, during the Great Depression. I know what it's like to sleep hungry, wondering if tomorrow will be better. And let me tell you something, it's not about how hard you fall, but about being willing to get back up, even when everything seems against you. Clint's words hit Kevin with unexpected force. He felt a knot form in his throat and realized he couldn't find an immediate response. For years he had convinced himself that his situation was unique, that no one would understand what it was like to live in such misery. But there stood Clint Eastwood, a man whose life seemed so distant from his own, saying he understood. Clint leaned back again, his posture relaxed, contrasting with the intensity of his words. Look, Kevin, I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. Life isn't fair, and it never will be. But what you need to decide is whether you're going to let it destroy you or use that pain to rebuild yourself. Kevin blinked rapidly, trying to ward off the tears that threatened to escape. He opened his mouth to respond, but all he could say was, "It's not that simple." "No, it's not simple," Clint agreed, nodding. "Simple never means easy, but you'll never know what's possible if you don't try." Kevin looked again at the business card, the printed words trembling in his hands. He thought of the cold nights he slept on the concrete, the meals he found in dumpsters, and the number of times the world seemed to turn its back on him. But now, there, sitting across from Clint Eastwood, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the realization that he had nothing left to lose. After a long silence, Kevin finally murmured, "I'll think about it." Clint nodded, a slight smile curving his lips. "That's all I'm asking." Kevin held the card tightly as he stood up, feeling the weight of Clint's words still reverberating in his mind. He didn't know exactly how he felt, but he knew that this encounter wouldn't leave his mind anytime soon. Before walking away completely, Kevin turned around hesitantly. "Thank you for listening to me." Clint gave a slight nod, his gaze firm and serene. "Take care, Kevin." And with that, Clint put his sunglasses back on and turned his attention to the cafe. But as Kevin walked down the street, feeling the rough texture of the card between his fingers, he realized that something had changed. Maybe it was just a small step, but it was a step in the direction of something new. Kevin didn't notice the slight tremor in Clint's hand as he held his coffee cup. He didn't notice how the actor's jaw tightened momentarily, as if he were fighting against a wave of emotion threatening to escape. When Kevin left, leaving the chair in front of him empty, Clint let out a deep sigh. For a moment his gaze remained fixed on the spot where Kevin had been sitting, and memories began to invade him. It wasn't the first time Clint remembered his past, but something about that encounter struck him differently. He went back in time to the difficult years of his youth. He was younger than Kevin when he discovered how cruel life could be. Growing up during the Great Depression, Clint witnessed his parents struggling daily to keep food on the table. There were nights when all they had was a single can of beans to share, and it was in those moments that small acts of kindness from strangers made all the difference. Clint remembered a neighbor, a mechanic, who offered him his first job. It wasn't a glamorous job, cleaning tools and organizing parts, but it was enough to teach him the dignity of work, regardless of the size of the task. That man believed in him when no one else did. and that changed the course of his life. Now, decades later, Clint carried those lessons with him. Despite his fame and success, he never forgot where he came from or the people who helped him along the way. For him, helping Kevin wasn't charity. It was a way to honor those who had believed in him during difficult times. He knew Kevin would face a long and hard journey, but he also knew that sometimes all a person needs is someone to believe in them, to spark a change. Meanwhile, Kevin wandered aimlessly through the busy streets, still holding the business card as if it were an anchor. He passed by shop windows, seeing his reflection in the glass, tired, downtrodden and worn out. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something different. Maybe it was hope. Passing by a laundromat, he stopped in front of the blinking neon sign. With the little money he had in his pocket, he decided to wash his clothes. If he were to show up at the shelter Clint had mentioned, he wanted to be minimally presentable. It was a small gesture, but it was also a first step. And as Kevin would soon realize, the first step is always the hardest and the most important. Arriving at the shelter was an emotional challenge. The bright fluorescent lights, the constant sound of footsteps and voices created a strange and intimidating environment. Kevin felt out of place, but he was greeted kindly by a team that did not judge him for his condition. For the first time in years, he felt that someone truly saw him, not as a problem, but as a person. Days turned into weeks, and Kevin began to rebuild his life. The shelter helped him secure a temporary job at a nearby warehouse, where he quickly proved to be reliable and dedicated. With the money he earned, he managed to rent a small shared apartment. Simple, but it was a roof over his head, a sign of stability he hadn't seen in years. During this time, Kevin often thought of Clint Eastwood. The business card, now crumpled and worn, became a reminder of the day that changed his life. One night, after a long shift, Kevin sat in his new home and wrote a letter to Clint. He thanked him for the gesture of kindness at the cafe and shared the progress he had made since then. Writing the letter was a way to close that chapter of his life and, at the same time, express his gratitude. He didn't expect a response, but he needed Clint to know the impact he had on his life. Months later, Clint received the letter in his office. He read it silently, attentively, and a slight smile formed on his lips. He carefully folded it and placed it in a special drawer where he kept other items that represented important moments of his journey. For Clint, the gesture wasn't about recognition or gratitude, but about paying forward the compassion that had once been given to him. Kevin's story didn't end there. Inspired by his own journey, he began volunteering at the shelter that had helped him. He shared his story with others in similar situations, offering words of encouragement and support. Gradually, Kevin became a symbol of resilience and hope within the community, showing that even in the darkest circumstances, it is possible to find a path to the light. The cafe on Melrose Avenue continued to be a passing spot for many, unaware of the transformative conversation that had taken place there. But for Kevin and Clint, that day was more than a casual encounter. It was a testament to the power of human connection, how a simple act of kindness can trigger changes beyond what we can imagine. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's continue spreading messages of compassion, resilience, and second chances to inspire even more people.